Walk into the west mouth of Naya Cave in Sarawak, and you can feel how time settles on stone. In 1958, a team digging in a sweltering trench beneath that vast limestone arch uncovered a partial human skull and scattered bones. The find became famous as the Deep Skull. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal, and the remains placed the person at roughly 37,000 years old, making this one of the oldest modern human skeletons found anywhere in island Southeast Asia. For more than half a century, the Deep Skull was treated as a relic of a people who came early and were later swept aside by farmers from farther north. That story no longer fits what the evidence shows. The new picture is not about disappearance, but about endurance. People arriving early, adapting and continuing, sometimes quietly, sometimes in plain sight, into the present day. A recent restudy of the Deep Skull did two important things. First, it corrected a long-standing assumption about who this individual was. The skull likely belonged to a middle-aged woman, not to an adolescent boy. Second, and more consequential, it showed that the skull's proportions and features resemble those of indigenous Borneans today much more than they resemble Australians or Tasmanians. That morphological connection points to local continuity in Borneo rather than to a vanished population replaced by newcomers. The earliest people in Borneo did not vanish. Their descendants are still there. Genetics reinforces this reading of the past. In 2023, scientists published a genome-wide study of several northeastern Bornean communities known collectively as the Punan. These are small, traditionally mobile forest groups who still practice parts of a foraging life, from honey harvesting on towering trees to seasonal movements between limestone rock shelters and riverside camps. The study found that the Punan form a tight genetic cluster of their own, distinct from neighbouring groups. Their ancestry branches off deep in time, before the rise and spread of the southern coastal East Asian ancestries that are often linked to the later Austronesian dispersal. In other words, the Punan are not farmers who recently returned to the forest. They are the heirs of a much older population history on Borneo. This result matters because it connects lines of evidence that were once treated separately. The skeleton in Naya Cave points to a person who looks like present-day Borneans. The genomes of present-day Punan point to a deep, local ancestry that is not primarily from later arrivals. Combined, they make a simple statement. Borneo's deep past did not end. It continued. The island's later peoples, with their own mixed mainland and island ancestries, did arrive and spread. But they did not erase everyone who was already there. They joined a human landscape that had been occupied for tens of thousands of years and that already contained its own rich variation. Set this picture beside what is now known from the mainland. In northern Laos, high on a mountain in the Annamite Range, lies Tampar Ling, the Cave of Monkeys. Over a series of seasons, excavators recovered fragments of a human skull and a shin bone from deep within the cave. The bones are modern human, not archaic. Dating of the sediments and associated animal teeth places the remains between about 68,000 and 86,000 years old. That pushes the presence of our species on the Southeast Asian mainland far earlier than many once thought. The bones likely washed into the cave during heavy rains, so they say little about daily life. But they say a great deal about timing and reach. Modern humans were in mainland Southeast Asia by at least 70,000 years ago, and perhaps earlier. These Laos fossils are sometimes described as evidence for a failed migration, a dramatic phrase suggesting that early groups pushed into the region and then died out without leaving descendants. The appeal of that idea is clear. Modern genetic data are dominated by later expansions, so the earliest waves can be hard to trace. But absence in a simple genetic model is not proof of extinction. Human history in Southeast Asia looks less like a clean set of layers and more like a long weave. Populations moved, met, and mixed. Some lineages grew while others dwindled. Cultural practices shifted even when people stayed. In such a setting, a population can survive and contribute genes while leaving only a faint signal in later datasets. Calling that failure is misleading. It collapses a long process into a single outcome and mistakes a quiet presence for an absent one, During glacial periods when sea levels were far lower, the Sunda Shelf linked much of mainland and island Southeast Asia into a continuous landmass. People would have moved along river corridors, across plains that are now sea, and through mountain passes that remain today. The archaeological record shows that the island's lifeways changed across the late Pleistocene and Holocene. Foraging continued, but people also experimented with new plants, built stone mounds in the highlands, and later adopted rice in some places. Rock art in eastern Borneo preserves images of hunters with headdresses and spears from more than 13,000 years ago. These shifts mark contact and innovation. They do not require a clean demographic break. In Borneo, the simplest explanation is that ancient communities modified their lives across time, that new people arrived and joined them, and that a deep line of local ancestry continued throughout. The study further identifies a weak but measurable signal linking the Punan to ancient hunter-gatherers from Liang Paningje in Sulawesi, who possessed a composite ancestry that included Papuan-related and Tianyuan/Onge-related ancestry, implying that the Punan share ancient population structure with these deeply divergent Asian foragers. This suggests that the Punan retain ancestry related both to early mainland Southeast Asian hunter-gatherers and to lineages that contributed to the ancient Ong and Tianyuan-like populations of island Southeast Asia, illustrating that Borneo hosted multiple early population layers rather than a simple replacement by Austronesian farmers. Furthermore, these early Asian skulls have genetic and morphological links to early Europeans, including from Oase Cave. The communities studied speak Austronesian languages like their neighbours, which reflects contact, influence, and the long reach of island networks. In their genomes, long stretches of shared sequence reveal both small population size and a history of relative isolation. These are the kinds of patterns one expects when a group has lived locally for a very long time, while keeping a distinctive way of life that fits a complex rainforest. There are hints that this deep island story touches older threads from beyond Borneo. The genetic study explored possible links between Punan ancestry and ancient individuals from elsewhere in island Southeast Asia, including a mid-Holocene hunter-gatherer from Sulawesi, who herself carried a mixture of Papuan-related and ancient Asian ancestry. The connection appears weak, and the study was careful about its limits, but the exercise is a reminder that people moved across the islands long before the great seafaring expansions of the last few thousand years. Even in a region where ancient DNA is hard to recover, small signals can point to older webs of contact. What, then, should we make of the claim that Tam Pa Ling represents a population that came early and vanished? It is more plausible that the cave captures one waypoint in a wide, long-lasting human presence on the mainland. The fossils themselves do not show houses, tools, or hearths, so it is difficult to reconstruct a life. But the fact that modern humans reached those upland limestone hills by 70,000 years ago changes the starting point for any story about Southeast Asia. It means humans had time to explore the landscapes that connect Laos to Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia. It means the mainland could feed movements into the islands and receive movements back from them. It means that the region's earliest people were not a single set of travelers skirting shorelines, but many groups moving through very different kinds of country. The people of Tam Pa Ling need not be the primary ancestors of any single population today to be part of this long-running story. The strongest reason to retire the language of failure is that it distorts the scale of time involved. When we talk about the past 70 to 80,000 years as if it were a few chapters in a short book, it becomes easy to imagine that one wave of people can simply wipe away another. Over such a long span, populations do not just replace each other like teams on a field. They blend, learn, intermarry, and change. Ancestry can persist at low levels through long periods, then grow again through chance, or become visible in one place while fading in another. Seen with that lens, the deep skull is not a mystery from a lost world. She represents a person whose closest counterparts live in Borneo today. The Punan are not people who recently abandoned crops to retreat into the jungle. They are a surviving branch of a deep island ancestry that predates later movements from the north. The people represented at Tam Pa Ling are not a doomed expedition into Asia. They are part of the earliest presence of our species in the region, a presence that set the stage for everything that followed. There will be revisions as new evidence arrives. The tropical climate destroys genetic material quickly, so it will be a challenge to extract ancient genomes that could tie remains like the deep skull or the louse bones directly to later populations. Archaeology in Southeast Asia is expanding, and each new site has the chance to thicken the plot. For now, the most responsible story is the one that fits the widest set of facts with the fewest assumptions. People reached mainland Southeast Asia far earlier than once believed. People lived in Borneo at least 37,000 years ago who look like Borneans today, and some island communities still carry a deep local ancestry that split off before the well-known expansions of the last few millennia. That is not replacement, that is survival. Instead of a failed migration, think of a long settlement with many chapters. Instead of a people who were replaced, think of a people who were joined by others. Instead of origins and endpoints, think of a living coastline and a shifting forest with communities that move, merge, and persist. The deep skull, the Punan, and the cave of monkeys do not describe a broken line. They describe a line that bends, runs through other lines, and continues on. If there is one conclusion to carry out of the cave, it is this. Southeast Asia has been a human homeland for far longer than we used to say. The first peoples did not fade from the record because they failed. They became the record because they stayed.